Hello friends, welcome to Manga College.
Brought to you by the Tao of Otaku.
I'm Ziki.
And I'm Bill. And this is the podcast for manga and comic book creators and fans alike that want to dive deeper into the art of creating great stories.
By now, you should know that Bill and I are comic creators trying to perfect our crafts. Really, we're students just trying to get better at what we do, and we love to take you guys along with us.
Woo! So what are we talking about this week?
Well, firstly, welcome back to the show, by the way.
Thank you. Been a while.
And I think it's been a 2-week absence, so hopefully the time's too much.
Yeah.
Today we'll be talking about when to stop or where to end. So the whole point of the beginning set of episodes is to kind of give you a blueprint to not only start your story, but to also finish it as well, because there's no point in starting if you don't know where to finish. So we're essentially just, well, I mean, not everyone thinks that way, but I think that's somewhat logical. So anyways, today we're just going to ask, like, where do you end your story, and how do you even choose a length for that matter? Because you could write an anthology, a short story, you could write a one-off graphic novel, or you could write One Piece. I mean, you probably can't, but...
I like how One Piece is in a category of its own. Like, there's long-running stories, then there's One Piece.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the thing is that a lot of, even I do this as well, where I'm the type of writer, I've written very, very few short stories, because I'm the type of person who always just thinks this could be more. So if I write a short story, I start to think about the character background and the depth and the exposition, blah, 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 blah. And so I think that oftentimes with a lot of writers, there's often a temptation to think that you're going to write something like, we don't even have to go to One Piece level. We could look at something like, say, Fairy Tail or Naruto, which are also very, very long running series. Or even, let's even just talk sheer numbers. Something that runs for about 200 issues is still fairly long, grand scheme of things. So I guess the question is where to stop, and then how do you choose a length? You and I have slightly different approaches, Bill, so I want you to talk a bit about how you go about thinking about these questions, and then I will jump in and chime in as well.
I'm going to talk about like what I think first, and then how I actually operate. So what I think is that as a writer, the length of your story should, and we've spoken about discovery writing, so that obviously warps the length. But you should, when going into it, know roundabouts how lengthy your story is. This is important because of pacing. There's no point of writing a 10-issue comic when you're setting a lot of groundwork for things that only happen in chapter 300. So, like, that way it doesn't make sense, like the practicality of it. And obviously you can rebut those points, but the way I operate personally, when I start making a story, because I am a discovery writer, it just happens in my head. And because I follow manga, I follow anime that runs for so long, I've just become accustomed to thinking and planning in terms of arcs and seasons. So like longevity is just a part of my story writing. Like at some point, like, we can just drop the main characters and keep going, because some people don't create stories per se, they create worlds, and the worlds have individual story threads that you can follow. Maybe this isn't applicable to everyone, but it's really like the best way that I've been able to operate.
Okay, so I'm going to build on a few of the things that you mentioned, the first of which is discovery writing, which, if you're not familiar, is essentially when you just put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard and you just write, and you don't plan the story and say it's going to go this way. You let your imagination take you where it will be, versus outlining, where you say, okay, this is going to happen, and then you just expand on said events. In any case, in terms of where to end, a useful framework to consider is that every story should have some sort of inciting incident that kicks things off. There should be some sort of complication to your characters that prevents them from reaching their goals, and oftentimes said complication will then erupt into a full-blown crisis, and then eventually said crisis will come to a resolution. So essentially, has my complication or has my crisis come to a resolution? If it has, then you might want to end your story there, or at least the first arc of your story. In terms of ending chapters, it's a slightly different because sometimes a chapter could end with the resolution of a crisis or a conflict, or it could just end with a permanent change. Something has been introduced to the lives of your characters, or your characters have taken a certain set of actions that have led to a permanent change in their lives or the world they live in. And in terms of how to choose a length, it's interesting because I think that there are multiple frameworks. So if you look at the first Matrix film, for example, the Matrix was a trilogy, but if you look at the first film, it's really a stand. It's really, you could watch that as a standalone film. But actually, let me actually lay this out here. So the three frameworks that I wanted to lay out are: number one, you can have your ending, a satisfying ending. All endings should be satisfying, but there are many loose ends. And this is usually the ending of an arc. Then you can have an ending with a few loose ends. And this could be the ending of an arc, or it could just be the ending of your story in total. And then you have an ending with zero loose ends. And this is usually the ending of a story. With option two, what this does is it allows you to do the story. So like the first Matrix film ends, and then the studio is like, oh wow, this is really interesting, let's do more of this. So if you leave one or two loose ends, then it might be an opportunity for your studio or your publisher or even you yourself to come back to that story and build on that world. And I mean, even if you tie up all of the loose ends, it just means then you need to introduce something new. So with the example of Star Wars, they're bringing in a new generation. With the example of Naruto, to Boruto, they're bringing in a new generation. So even if you tie up all the loose ends, what that means is that you then need to bring in new things into the world of your story for it to keep on going. And that's a useful framework to think of how to choose a length and where to end your story or your story arc.